He thought he'd won the lottery. He took the house, the cars, the business, and even the dog. He left his wife of 10 years with nothing but the clothes on her back, convinced she was the dead weight dragging him down. But Grant Caldwell was about to learn a brutal lesson in economics. He didn't realize that the empire he built wasn't funded by his genius. It was funded by the very woman he'd just destroyed. And when the ink on the divorce papers dried, the bank accounts didn't just freeze, they vanished. This is the story of a man who took everything, only to find out he owned absolutely nothing. The sound of the gavel hitting the mahogany block echoed through the courtroom like a gunshot. But for Grant Caldwell, it sounded like a starter pistol. The race was over, and he had won. He adjusted the cuffs of his bespoke Brioni suit, glancing sideways at the woman sitting at the opposing table. Audrey. She looked small, almost grey, blending into the muted tones of the courtroom walls. She kept her head down, her blonde hair pulled back in a severe, fraying bun. She hadn't looked him in the eye since the deposition 3 months ago. "Mr. Caldwell," Judge Harrison said, peering over his spectacles. "The court grants the divorce on the grounds of irreconcilable differences. Per the prenuptial agreement and the subsequent addendums signed by Mrs. Caldwell, the assets of Caldwell Tech Solutions, the marital home in Greenwich, and the investment portfolio are awarded solely to you. Mrs. Caldwell is to receive a one-time settlement of $50,000 and her personal effects." Grant suppressed a smirk. 50 grand. It was an insult, a crumb thrown to a pigeon, and he loved it. He had spent the last year meticulously restructuring the company, hiding assets in shell corporations, and gaslighting Audrey into believing the business was failing so she wouldn't fight for a share. He'd convinced her that by signing the debt relief waivers, which were actually asset transfers, she was saving herself from his impending bankruptcy. She had believed him. She always believed him. Audrey stood up slowly. She didn't cry. She simply packed her cheap notepad into her tote bag. "Good luck, Grant," she said softly. It was the first time she had spoken. Her voice wasn't angry. It was hollow. "Don't pretend you care, Audrey," Grant scoffed, loud enough for his shark of a lawyer, Simon, to hear and chuckle. "You're just upset the free ride is over. Go find some other sap to subsidize your gardening hobbies." She looked at him then, her eyes a startlingly clear blue. There was no sadness there, which unsettled him for a microsecond. It looked almost like pity. "I'm not the one who needs the subsidy," she whispered. Before Grant could fire back a witty retort, she turned and walked out of the double doors. Grant turned to Simon, high-fiving the lawyer. "Did you see that? Pathetic. She actually thinks she contributed. She signed the exit papers without reading the fine print on the NDAs." Simon laughed, stacking his files. "You, my friend, are a free man, and a rich one. The Series B funding round for Caldwell Tech is due to hit next week, right? 5 million? 5 million minimum," Grant beamed, checking his Rolex. "The investors love me. I'm the face, the brain, and the talent. Audrey was just furniture." He walked out of the courthouse and into the blinding afternoon sun. A sleek, red Porsche 911 was waiting at the curb. Inside sat Jessica, 23 years old, with hair the color of corn silk and a smile that cost more than Audrey's settlement. "Did we win?" Jessica squealed as he slid into the driver's seat. "Baby!" Grant revved the engine, the roar echoing off the legal buildings. "We didn't just win, we wiped the board clean. Everything is ours." He peeled away from the curb, leaving the grey figure of his ex-wife standing at the bus stop in his rearview mirror. He didn't even tap the brakes. 2 weeks later, life was a blur of expensive decisions. Grant sat in the expansive living room of the Greenwich estate. It was a beautiful house, modern, glass-walled, overlooking a private wooded area. Audrey had designed the interior, curated the art, and managed the staff, but Grant had fired the staff the day after the divorce. He didn't need Audrey's spies around. He hired a new cleaning service and a private chef who specialized in keto diets. He was currently on a Zoom call with his VP of operations, a nervous man named Todd. "So, the projections for Q3 are looking aggressive," Grant said, leaning back in his Herman Miller chair, sipping an espresso. "I want to push the marketing budget up by 20%. We need to capitalize on the new Bachelor branding." Todd hesitated on the screen. "Right, Grant. About the budget. Have we received the wire from Aurora Holdings yet?" Grant rolled his eyes. "Todd, relax. Aurora Holdings wires the operating capital on the 1st of every month. It's automatic. It's been automatic for 6 years." "I know, sir. It's the 4th. Grant paused. He checked the calendar on his desktop. Indeed, it was October 4th. "Banking error." Grant dismissed it with a wave of his hand. "I'll call the liaison. Probably just a delay because of the bank holiday in wherever they're based. Cayman? Swiss? Doesn't matter." "Okay," Todd said, looking unconvinced. "But payroll is due on the 7th. If that injection doesn't hit—" "It will hit," Grant snapped. "Stop panicking. This is why I run the company, Todd, and you just work here. Go fix the slide deck." He cut the call. Annoyance pricked at his neck. Aurora Holdings was his angel investor. He had never actually met the principal owner. The deal had been set up years ago, when he was just starting out in a garage. Audrey had introduced him to a lawyer friend of her father's, who said he represented a private equity firm interested in tech startups. They had funded Caldwell Tech every month like clockwork, in exchange for a consulting fee structure that allowed them to write off taxes. It was free money, essentially. Grant assumed they just liked his genius. He picked up his phone and dialed the number for the Aurora liaison, a Mr. Sterling, no relation to the bank. "The number you have dialed is no longer in service." Grant frowned. He pulled the phone away and looked at the screen. He redialed. "The number you have dialed is no longer in service." "Weird," he muttered. He checked his email. He searched for Aurora. He found the last email from them, dated 3 weeks ago. It was a standard automated notification of payment. He hit reply. Delivery status notification. Failure. Address not found. A cold drop of sweat rolled down his back. "Jessica!" he yelled. Jessica trotted into the room, wearing one of Audrey's old silk robes she had found in the guest closet. "What's wrong, babe? You're ruining my zen. I'm trying to manifest a vacation to Bali." "Where is the file cabinet? The one Audrey used to keep in the study. The oak one." "Oh, that ugly thing." Jessica wrinkled her nose. "I told the movers to trash it when we redid the office last week. You said to get rid of her stench, remember?" Grant stood up, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. "You threw away the files, the physical files. You have everything on the cloud, don't you?" Jessica asked, looking bored. "Grant, you're the tech genius. Why do you need paper?" "Because the contact for the primary investor was in a red folder in that cabinet," Grant roared. Jessica recoiled, tears instantly welling up. "Don't yell at me. You promised no drama. You said she was the drama." Grant ignored her. He scrambled to his computer. He logged into the company bank account. Balance: 14,203.4444. He stared. That couldn't be right. There should be at least 200,000 in there for operations. He clicked on Transaction History. There was a massive withdrawal, dated the day after the divorce was finalized. Debit: 185,000. Source. Description: Return of secured collateral. VE Trust. VE Trust, Grant whispered. He had never heard of it. He scrolled back. Every month for 6 years, there was a deposit from Aurora Holdings. But when he clicked the details of the deposit, he saw the routing number. He quickly opened a new tab and typed in the routing number into a bank identifier tool. Bank. First National of Savannah. Savannah, Georgia. Grant froze. Audrey was from Savannah, but her family was poor. That was the whole narrative. She was the poor Southern belle he had rescued from a life of sweet tea and humidity. Her father was a retired high school history teacher. Her mother wove baskets. He grabbed his car keys. "Where are you going?" Jessica cried. "I have to go to the bank," Grant snarled. "Someone is stealing from me." He drove to his local branch, storming into the manager's office. He slammed his ID down. "I need to know who authorized a transfer of nearly 200 grand out of my business account." The manager, a calm woman named Mrs. Higgins, who had known Audrey for years, looked up over her glasses. She tapped on her keyboard. "Mr. Caldwell," she said icily. "That transfer was automatic. It was the reclamation of a security deposit." "What security deposit? That was my revenue." "No, sir." Mrs. Higgins turned the screen. "According to the loan documents signed at the inception of your business account 6 years ago, the operating capital was provided as a revolving line of credit secured by a third-party guarantor. The guarantor had the right to withdraw the collateral if the primary account holder's marital status changed." Grant felt the room spin. Marital status? What kind of psycho clause is that? "It's a standard protection clause for family trusts, Mr. Caldwell," Mrs. Higgins said, a hint of a smile playing on her lips. The guarantor was the Audrey Miller Revocable Trust. Grant blinked. Audrey? My Audrey? She doesn't have a trust. She bought her clothes at Target. "Mrs. Caldwell," the manager corrected, "is the sole beneficiary of the Miller-Vance estate. It's quite substantial. Old cotton money, I believe, but very private. She personally guaranteed your business loans. When you divorced her, the guarantee expired. The trust pulled the funds." Grant stood there, his mouth agape. But the monthly payments? Aurora Holdings? A shell company set up by the trust to pay your salary so you wouldn't feel emasculated by your wife's wealth, Mrs. Higgins said, closing the folder. "She was funding you, Grant. Every dime. You haven't made a legitimate profit in 4 years. It's all been her allowance." Grant felt his knees buckle. He had to grab the edge of the desk. "So," he croaked, "I have nothing?" "You have the house," Mrs. Higgins reminded him. "Oh, wait, the mortgage on the Greenwich house." "I took it," Grant said, hope flaring. "It's a $5 million asset." "It's an interest-only loan," Mrs. Higgins said softly. "The balloon payment of $4 million is due next month. The trust was scheduled to pay it. But since the trust has withdrawn—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Grant Caldwell walked out of the bank. The sun was still shining, but his world had just gone pitch black. Grant stormed out of the bank, his vision blurring with rage. He sat in the driver's seat of the Porsche, his hands shaking so violently he couldn't get the key into the ignition. "This is illegal," he muttered to himself, spit flying onto the dashboard. "This is fraud. She defrauded me." He dialed Simon, his shark of a divorce attorney. "Simon, we need to sue her. We need to reopen the settlement immediately. She hid assets, massive assets. She's a trust fund baby, Simon. She has millions, maybe billions, and she played poor." Simon's voice was uncharacteristically cool on the other end. "Grant, calm down. Who are we talking about?" "Audrey. The Miller-Vance Trust, or whatever it's called. She was funding my company through a shell corporation. She pulled the plug. I have 0 operating capital. You need to file an emergency motion for spousal support. She defrauded the court by claiming poverty." There was a long silence on the line. Then, the sound of paper shuffling. "Grant," Simon said, his tone shifting from buddy-buddy to strictly professional. "I'm looking at your file. You insisted on a strict, 'what's mine is mine, what's yours is yours' clause. You explicitly waived all discovery into her finances because, and I quote, 'I don't want to waste billable hours looking at her knitting receipts.' You signed a waiver, acknowledging that both parties had the opportunity to investigate financial disclosures and chose to decline." "I didn't know she was rich," Grant screamed. "That's not fraud, Grant. That's negligence on your part. And frankly, if she was funding your company, that means she was your primary investor. Did you have a contract with Aurora Holdings?" "No. It was a handshake deal with her friend." "Then you have no recourse," Simon sighed. "Look, since we're on the phone, your retainer for the post-judgment filing is depleted. I'm going to need another $10,000 before I file any motions." "I don't have $10,000. She took it all." "Then I can't help you. Good luck, Grant." The line went dead. Grant threw the phone against the passenger seat. He needed quick cash. He looked at the steering wheel. The Porsche. It was a 911 Turbo S. It was worth at least $200 grand. He owned it outright. He had made the final payment last month. He started the engine and peeled out, heading for the high-end exotic car dealership in downtown Greenwich. He'd sell the car, get liquid cash, keep the company afloat for a month, and land the Series B funding from a real VC firm. He could fix this. He pulled into the dealership, screeching to a halt. A salesman named Chad, who smelled of excessive cologne, walked out. "Grant, good to see you. Looking to upgrade?" "Looking to sell, Chad," Grant said, stepping out and smoothing his suit. "I need liquidity for a new acquisition. I want to offload the 911 today. Cash wire." Chad walked around the car, whistling. "Beautiful machine. Let me just pull up the title in the system." Grant followed him inside to the glass-walled office. Chad typed on his keyboard. He frowned. He typed again. "Oh, Grant," Chad said, spinning the monitor around. "I can't buy this car from you." "Why not? It's pristine." "Because you don't own it." Grant laughed nervously. "Don't be stupid. I paid it off. I wrote the check myself." "You made the payments," Chad corrected, "but the title is held by Blue Heron Leasing, LLC." "That's my holding company," Grant insisted. "Is it?" Chad clicked a button, bringing up the corporate registration for Blue Heron Leasing. "Because the registered agent for Blue Heron Leasing is, let me see here, a Ms. Sarah Jenkins, acting as power of attorney for—" Chad squinted. "Audrey Miller." The room seemed to tilt. "She leased the car to me," Grant whispered. "Technically," Chad said, looking uncomfortable. "She bought the car. Her company leased it to you for $1 a month. The lease expired upon the dissolution of your marriage. Actually, there's a repo order in the system as of this morning." "Repo?" Two large men in jumpsuits walked into the dealership lobby. They looked at Chad. Chad pointed at Grant. "Mr. Caldwell," one of the men asked. "We're here for the vehicle. Keys, please." "You have to be kidding me," Grant stammered, backing away. "This is my car." "Not anymore, buddy. Hand over the fob, or we call the cops and report it stolen." Grant handed over the keys. His hands were numb. He watched through the window as they got into his red Porsche, the symbol of his success, his virility, his freedom, and drove it off the lot. He was stranded at a car dealership, 5 miles from home, with a dead cell phone and a wallet full of maxed-out credit cards. He had to call an Uber. But when he opened the app, his payment method was declined. The card attached to the account was the business card, the one connected to the empty bank account. Grant Caldwell, the tech mogul, began the long walk home in his Italian loafers. By the time he got to the gates of his estate, his feet were blistered and bleeding. But the nightmare was only just beginning. The next morning, the house was silent. Jessica was gone. She hadn't left a note, but her side of the closet was empty. The expensive espresso machine was also missing. Grant sat on the floor of his home office, surrounded by boxes of old paperwork he had dug out of the attic. Boxes Jessica hadn't managed to throw away yet. He was looking for anything, a scrap of paper, a vulnerability he could exploit. He found a binder labeled Patents and IP. He opened it, desperate to confirm that at least he owned the code. He was the genius coder, right? He had built the Caldwell algorithm that optimized supply chains. That was his brain. He flipped to the patent registration. Assignee, the Miller Innovation Grant. Inventor, Grant Caldwell. Exclusive licensee, Caldwell Tech Solutions. He read the fine print of the licensing agreement. The inventor, Grant Caldwell, assigns all rights to the Miller Innovation Grant in exchange for funding of research. The Miller Innovation Grant grants a revocable license to Caldwell Tech Solutions to use said IP. This license may be revoked at any time with 30 days' notice. Grant stared at the page. He remembered this. Audrey had brought him the papers 5 years ago. She said, "Honey, my dad's friend has a grant program for startups. If you signed this, they'll pay for all the filing fees and protect the legal side so you don't have to worry." He had signed it because he was busy playing video games and didn't want to read legal jargon. He didn't own his code. He didn't own the algorithm. He was just a user with a revoked license. His laptop pinged. A notification. System alert. Your access to the Caldwell Tech server has been suspended by the administrator. "I am the administrator!" Grant screamed at the screen. He tried to log in. Access denied. He tried to bypass the firewall. Access denied. Then, a video window popped up on his screen. It wasn't a glitch. It was a pre-recorded message. Audrey's face appeared. She wasn't the grey, mousy woman from the courtroom. She was wearing a sharp navy blazer, her hair blown out in loose waves, makeup impeccable. She looked powerful. She looked like a CEO. "Hello, Grant," the video version of Audrey said. Her voice was calm, almost bored. "If you're seeing this, it means you tried to access the source code after the divorce was finalized. I told the IT team to set a trigger. I figured it would take you about 48 hours to realize you don't actually own anything." Grant stared, mesmerizingly horrified. "You see?" Audrey continued, leaning into the camera. "You always called me simple. You told your friends I was low maintenance. You liked that I didn't ask questions, but you never asked questions either. You never asked where the money came from. You never asked why the bills were always paid, even when you spent the company account on trips to Vegas. You never asked who cleaned up your messes." She took a sip of tea. "I didn't want to ruin you, Grant. I loved you. I was happy to stay in the background and let you play businessman because it made you happy. I used my inheritance to prop up your ego for a decade. But then you cheated. And then you got cruel, and then you tried to leave me with nothing." She smiled, a cold, terrifying smile. "You wanted a clean break? You got it. I've revoked the IP license. I've recalled the loans. I've cancelled the leases. The house you're sitting in, the deed is in a trust name. Look it up. The Tartarus Trust. You're technically a squatter as of midnight tonight." The video cut to black. Grant scrambled to his feet. He had to find her. He had to beg. If threats wouldn't work, he would grovel. He knew she had a soft spot for him. She had to. He remembered her mention of a family property in upstate New York once. She said it was a shack, a little cabin. He ran to the garage. The Porsche was gone. The Range Rover, Jessica's car, was gone. There was only an old bicycle in the corner, left behind by a gardener. Grant Caldwell, wearing a wrinkled suit, got on the rusty bicycle and pedaled toward the train station. He used his last bit of cash to buy a ticket to Rhinebeck, the town she had mentioned years ago. It took him 6 hours. When he arrived in Rhinebeck, he asked a cab driver if he knew of a Miller estate. The cab driver laughed. "Buddy, everyone knows the Miller estate. It's the castle on the hill, but you can't just walk up there." "Take me there," Grant demanded. "I'll pay you when we get there. My wife is inside." The driver looked skeptical, but agreed. They drove up a winding private road, lined with ancient oaks. The shack Audrey had described was a sprawling, Gilded Age mansion made of stone, overlooking the Hudson River. It was bigger than a hotel. There were fountains. There were peacocks roaming the lawn. Grant got out, ignoring the cab driver's shouts for payment, and ran to the massive iron gates. He pressed the intercom button frantically. Audrey, I know you're in there. Let me in." The speaker crackled. A male voice, deep and gravelly, answered. "Mr. Caldwell, we've been expecting you." The gates slowly buzzed open. Grant walked up the mile-long driveway, sweating, out of breath. When he reached the front door, it was opened by a butler. A literal butler in a tuxedo. "Ms. Miller is in the conservatory," the butler said, not making eye contact. Grant followed him through hallways lined with original oil paintings, Monet's, Renoir. He felt like an insect crawling through a palace. He burst into the conservatory, a glass room filled with exotic orchids. Audrey was sitting at a white iron table reading the Wall Street Journal. Across from her sat a man Grant didn't recognize, a handsome, older man in a bespoke suit. "Audrey!" Grant gasped, falling to his knees. "Audrey, please! You have to stop this! They took the car! The business is dead! I have nothing!" Audrey didn't look up from her paper. "Hello, Grant. You owe the cab driver $40. I sent Thomas down to pay him." "Audrey, stop playing games! You're my wife!" "Ex-wife," the man across from her said. He stood up and extended a hand. "I'm Alistair Sterling. I manage the Miller family investments, and consequently, I was the one managing your company for the last 6 years. Grant looked at Alistair. "You? You're Aurora Holdings." "I am," Alistair said pleasantly. "And I must say, your business plans were atrocious. If it weren't for Audrey's instructions to keep you solvent, I would have liquidated you in 2019. "Audrey?" Grant crawled toward her, grabbing the hem of her silk dress. "Baby, please. I'm sorry. I was stressed. Jessica meant nothing. We can fix this. Look at all this money. We can rule the world together. I can run the tech side. You can handle the money. We're a team." Audrey finally lowered the newspaper. She looked at him with an expression of profound disappointment. "You still don't get it," she said softly. "I don't need a team, and I certainly don't need a mascot. You were a hobby, Grant, a charity case I fell in love with, but charities get shut down when the overhead gets too high." "I am not a charity case. I am a visionary," Grant shrieked, his dignity completely gone. "You're a squatter," Audrey said, standing up, "and you're trespassing. Alistair, please show Mr. Caldwell the exit, and give him a bus ticket back to the city. I'm not cruel." "You can't do this!" Grant lunged for her. 2 security guards stepped out from behind the ferns, grabbing Grant by the arms before he could touch her. "Get him out of here," Alistair ordered. As they dragged him away, Grant screamed, "I'll tell everyone! I'll tell the press! I'll expose you!" Audrey didn't even turn around. She just picked up her teacup. Grant didn't go back to the city. He was dropped off at the train station with a one-way ticket and $20 in cash. He was consumed by a need for vengeance. If he couldn't have the money, he would burn her reputation to the ground. She wanted to be private. He would make her famous. He went to the local library and used the public computer. He logged into his Twitter account, which still had 50,000 followers from his tech guru days. He began to type. Thread. The truth about Audrey Miller. How a billionaire heiress trapped me, stole my IP, and ruined my life. Justice for Grant a resort as such. Eat the Rich. He spent hours crafting the narrative. He spun a tale of a hard-working innovator who was seduced by a woman who hid her wealth, used his genius to build her portfolio, and then discarded him when he asked for a fair share. He omitted the cheating. He omitted the fact that she paid for everything. He painted himself as the victim of a financial vampire. He hit post. Then he went to YouTube. He recorded a video on his phone in the library bathroom, tears streaming down his face. Some fake, some real. She used me, he sobbed into the camera. She's the 1% and she crushed me because I'm a self-made man. He uploaded it. By the time he took the train back to the city, the thread had gone viral. Comments were pouring in. OMG, this is terrible. Screw her. Boycott Miller Industries. Stay strong, Grant. Grant smiled as he watched the likes tick up. 10K, 50K, 100K. He was winning the court of public opinion. He checked his email. A producer from a major morning news show wanted to interview him. This is it, Grant thought, sitting on a bench in Central Park because he couldn't go home. I'll get a book deal. I'll become a men's rights icon. I'll make my own millions. His phone rang. It was a blocked number. Ready to negotiate, Audrey, he answered smugly. Mr. Caldwell? It wasn't Audrey. It was a man's voice. Sharp, American. This is Special Agent Miller, no relation, with the FBI, Financial Crimes Division. Grant froze. FBI? What is this about? We've been monitoring your social media activity regarding the Miller Innovation Grant and Caldwell Tech Solutions. Your public admission of ownership and control over these entities has raised some red flags regarding your tax filings for the last 5 years. What? No, I said she owned them. She pulled the money. In your tweet, you claimed you were the sole architect and that the revenue was generated by your genius. However, your tax returns list your income as consulting fees and classify the business as operating at a loss to avoid taxes. If you are indeed the owner as you claim publicly, you owe the IRS approximately $1.2 million in back taxes and penalties for unreported income. Grant felt the blood drain from his face. No, wait, I was lying. I mean, it was a narrative. She paid for everything. So you're admitting to filing false public statements to manipulate stock prices or defame a private citizen. That's a separate issue, Mr. Caldwell. But right now, we're interested in the wire fraud allegations. Wire fraud? Yes. It appears you signed several loan applications with First National Bank, stating you had unencumbered assets in the form of IP. If you didn't own that IP, as you just tweeted, you committed bank fraud. 5 counts. Grant dropped the phone. A shadow fell over him. He looked up. Standing in front of the park bench weren't FBI agents. It was a process server. A kid in a hoodie. Grant Caldwell? The kid asked. Grant nodded dumbly. You've been served. He handed Grant a thick envelope. Grant opened it. Plaintiff, Audrey Miller. Action. Defamation, libel, and breach of non-disclosure agreement. Damages sought, $50,000. The tweet, the video. He had signed an NDA 5 years ago in exchange for the seed money, her allowance. He had forgotten about it. By going public, he hadn't just exposed her. He had triggered a penalty clause that made the prenup look like pocket change. And worse, in the comments of his viral tweet, a new reply was pinned to the top. It was from an account called The Receipts Queen. It was a single image, a screenshot of Grant's text messages to Jessica, dated 6 months ago. "Don't worry, babe, I'm just using the old hag for her connections. Once the Series B hits, I'm dumping her and we're going to Cabo." The internet tide turned instantly. Wow, what a scumbag. He cheated on her, and she paid his bills. Team Audrey. Grant sat on the bench, the papers fluttering in the wind. It started to rain. He had no home, no car, no money, no reputation. And now he was facing federal prison and a $50 million lawsuit. He looked at the towering skyline of New York City. Somewhere in one of those penthouses, Audrey was probably warm, dry, and drinking tea. Grant curled into a ball on the bench and closed his eyes. The descent from a penthouse in Greenwich to a holding cell in Lower Manhattan was not just a fall. It was a crash that shattered Grant's reality. He spent the night on a metal bench next to a man who was weeping about a stolen bicycle. Grant didn't weep. He stared at the concrete wall, his mind racing, still convinced there was an angle, a loophole, a way to spin this. He was released on bail the next morning. Bail posted not by a friend, but by a bail bondsman who took Grant's vintage watch, the last asset he had on his person, as collateral. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal nightmares. The FBI investigation into the bank fraud was moving slowly, a looming storm cloud. But the civil lawsuit from Audrey, the $50 million defamation suit, was moving with terrifying speed. Grant couldn't afford a high-powered defense team. He was stuck with a court-appointed attorney for the criminal charges, and for the civil suit, he hired a strip mall lawyer named Saul Pinter, who smelled of stale tobacco and desperation. "We settle," Saul told him in a diner booth, wiping grease off his tie. "We beg for mercy. You sign a retraction, you apologize publicly, and maybe she drops the damages to a manageable number." "No." Grant slammed his fist on the sticky table. "She's bluffing. She doesn't want a public trial. She values her privacy too much. We fight. We countersue for emotional distress and financial entrapment." Saul sighed, lighting a cigarette indoors despite the protests of the waitress. "Kid, you don't countersue a tank with a slingshot, but it's your funeral." The trial began 3 months later. The courtroom was packed. The viral nature of Grant's downfall had attracted the vultures of the press. They weren't there to cheer for him anymore. They were there to watch the execution. Audrey sat at the plaintiff's table. She looked radiant, wearing a cream-colored suit that probably cost more than Saul's entire career earnings. She sat next to Alistair Sterling and a team of lawyers who looked like they were carved out of granite. Grant took the stand on the 3rd day. He thought he could charm the jury. He thought he could explain that he was the victim of a manipulative heiress. Mr. Caldwell, Audrey's lead attorney, a razor-sharp woman named Diana Wright, approached the stand. "You claimed in your video that you were the sole provider for the household. Is that correct?" "I brought in the energy," Grant said, flashing a smile at the jury. "I built the brand." "The brand," Diana repeated flatly. She clicked a remote. A projection screen lowered. It displayed a spreadsheet. Household expenses, 2018-2024. "Can you identify this document, Mr. Caldwell?" "It looks like a bank statement." "It is. It details the mortgage payments, the utility bills, the car leases, the vacations to Saint-Tropez, the bespoke suits you are currently wearing. Can you show me a single line item where the funds originated from a Grant Caldwell account?" Grant squinted at the screen. It was a sea of Miller Trust transfers. "Well, Money is fungible, Grant stammered. I was working. My sweat equity. We aren't talking about sweat, Mr. Caldwell. We are talking about math. You contributed $0 to the marriage for 6 years. In fact, you cost the marital estate approximately $4 million in gambling debts and failed crypto investments. Is that correct? Those were strategic diversifications. Strategic, Diana deadpanned. Let's talk about strategy. Let's talk about Jessica. Grant froze. He looked at the back of the courtroom. The doors opened. Jessica walked in. She wasn't wearing the designer clothes he had bought her, with Audrey's money. She was wearing a modest dress. She looked young, scared, and credible. Grant's stomach dropped. She's a hostile witness. She's my partner. Your partner has been subpoenaed, Diana said coolly. And she has been granted immunity regarding her involvement in your unauthorized use of company credit cards in exchange for her testimony. Jessica took the stand. She didn't look at Grant. Ms. York, Diana asked, did Mr. Caldwell ever discuss his financial plans with you? Yes, Jessica whispered into the microphone. All the time. And what were those plans? Jessica took a shaky breath. He told me that his wife was a clueless cash cow. He said he was going to wait until she inherited her grandmother's estate, then divorce her, take half, and leave her with nothing. He called it the long con. He said he hated her. He said she was boring and pathetic. A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Grant stood up, knocking his chair over. Liar! I never said that. You're making it up. Order! The judge banged his gavel. Sit down, Mr. Caldwell, or I will hold you in contempt. She's lying, Grant screamed, his face purple. She's just trying to save herself. I loved Audrey. I loved her money. I loved her. The slip was audible. The entire room went silent. Even Saul, his lawyer, put his head in his hands. Audrey finally looked at him. Her expression wasn't angry. It was one of pure, unadulterated pity. It was the look you give a dog that has run into traffic. I have no further questions, Diana said, closing her folder. The jury deliberated for less than an hour. The verdict was unanimous. Grant was found liable for defamation, breach of contract, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Damages awarded, $55,000. But as the gavel came down, 2 men in windbreakers moved from the back of the room. They weren't bailiffs. Grant Caldwell, one of them said, flashing an FBI badge. You are under arrest for wire fraud, bank fraud, and tax evasion. Please place your hands behind your back. Grant looked around the room, wild-eyed. He looked at the judge. He looked at the press. He looked at Audrey. She stood up, gathered her purse, and walked out without looking back. The handcuffs clicked. It was the loudest sound Grant had ever heard. The scent of the Federal Correctional Facility was something Grant Caldwell believed he would never grow used to. A suffocating mixture of industrial-grade bleach, floor wax, and the metallic tang of despair. It was a far cry from the sandalwood and sea salt candles Audrey used to light in their Greenwich estate. A scent he had once complained was too feminine while he sat in a home she paid for, plotting how to take it from her. Grant sat at a scarred plastic table in the common room, his hands, once soft from a life of avoiding manual labor, now calloused and stained from his detail in the prison laundry. He was no longer the visionary of the year or the disruptor of logistics. Here, he was simply inmate 74902. He had been sentenced to 8 years for a litany of financial crimes that came to light the moment Audrey stopped protecting him. Wire fraud, bank fraud, and tax evasion were the heavy anchors that finally dragged him to the bottom. In the corner of the room, A small television set was bolted to the wall, protected by a thick sheet of plexiglass. It was tuned to a financial news network. Usually, Grant ignored the screen. The sight of the world he had lost was too painful. But today, a familiar name scrolled across the ticker at the bottom of the screen, and his breath hitched in his chest. Miller Vance. Global to unveil Phoenix Logistics Hub in Savannah. "Hey, turn that up," Grant rasped. His voice was different now, thinner, stripped of the bravado that once made investors reach for their checkbooks. The news anchor, a woman Grant used to flirt with at charity galas, spoke with an air of reverence. "It is the largest private investment in Georgia's history. Audrey Miller Vance, the reclusive billionaire who took over her family's estate 5 years ago, is today opening the most advanced automated shipping hub in the world." The camera cut to a live feed in Savannah. The heat shimmered off the pavement of a massive, gleaming facility that looked more like a space station than a warehouse. And there, standing at a podium decorated with the Miller Vance crest, was Audrey. Grant leaned forward, his forehead almost touching the plexiglass. She looked younger than the day they had divorced. Her hair was a honeyed blonde, flowing freely in the southern breeze. She wore a sharp, tailored suit in a shade of emerald green that made her eyes pop, even on the low-resolution prison screen. She wasn't the mousy, quiet woman he had spent a decade gaslighting. She was a titan. 5 years ago, Audrey began, her voice projected through the television speakers with a calm authority. "I was told that I was merely a passenger in the world of technology. I was told that the genius required to revolutionize this industry belonged to men who spoke louder than they worked." A few inmates in the room chuckled. Grant felt a cold sweat break out on his neck. "When I took back control of my assets," Audrey continued, "I discovered that the company I had been funding, Caldwell Tech, was built on a foundation of sand and stolen ideas. The code was inefficient, the logic was flawed, and the leadership was absent. So I did what any builder does. I cleared the site, I leveled the ruins, and I started over." The reporter interrupted with a question. "Mrs. Miller Vance, there are rumors that you personally wrote the core optimization algorithm for the Phoenix hub. Is it true you have a background in systems engineering?" Audrey smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that Grant realized he hadn't seen in years because he had never looked at her long enough to notice. "I have a degree from MIT in applied mathematics," she said simply. "I kept it quiet because my late father believed in discretion, and my ex-husband, well, he preferred it if I stayed in the garden. But it turns out that when you stop dimming your light to keep someone else from feeling small, you can illuminate an entire industry." Grant's heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. MIT? She had never told him she went to MIT. He had always assumed she went to some finishing school for socialites. He realized with a sickening jolt that he had never once asked her about her education. He had spent 10 years talking over her, explaining her own life to her, while she sat there with a doctorate-level understanding of the very math he was faking. The broadcast showed Audrey cutting a ribbon with a pair of golden shears. Beside her stood a tall, athletic man with silver at his temples, a philanthropist named Julian Sterling, a cousin of Alistair, Grant noted with a pang of jealousy. The man placed a hand on the small of Audrey's back, a gesture of deep respect and affection. "She's a smoke show," one of the inmates muttered, leaning against the wall. "And rich? Man, imagine being the guy who let that go." Grant felt a roar of phantom rage, but it had nowhere to go. It hit the concrete walls and died. He was the guy. He was the man who had traded a queen for a pawn, thinking he was the one making the moves. He thought about his current wealth. He had a bank balance of exactly $12.40, earned from 60 hours of scrubbing laundry. He had a debt to the Miller Vance estate of $55 million, a judgment that would follow him to his grave. Every book he might write, every interview he might give, every cent he might ever earn would be diverted to Audrey's trust. He was her property now, in a way he had never been when they were married. The news segment ended, transitioning to a story about a rise in interest rates. Grant sat back, the plastic chair creaking under his weight. He looked at the clock on the wall. It was 3 p.m. In 10 minutes, he would have to go back to the laundry room to fold sheets for men who didn't know his name. He thought back to the night before the divorce was finalized. He had sat in a bar with Jessica, laughing about how he was stripping Audrey for parts. He had felt so powerful, so clever. He had looked at Audrey as a resource to be mined, a vessel to be emptied. He hadn't realized that Audrey wasn't the vessel. She was the ocean, and he was just a man on a leaky raft who had mistaken her calm for weakness. "Time's up, 74902, a guard shouted, banging a nightstick against the doorframe. "Back to work." Grant stood up. His Italian loafers were long gone, replaced by state-issued canvas slip-ons. He walked toward the door, his head down. As he passed the mirror in the hallway, he caught a glimpse of himself. He looked old. He looked small. He looked like exactly what he was, a man who had tried to steal a life he wasn't brave enough to build for himself. Outside the narrow window, the sun was setting over the New York skyline, glinting off the glass towers where people were making deals, falling in love and building empires. Somewhere out there, Audrey was starting her real life. And here, in the cold, sterile quiet of the prison, Grant Caldwell was finally beginning his. He walked into the laundry room, picked up a stained sheet, and began to fold. The story of Grant and Audrey isn't just a tale of a divorce gone wrong. It's a masterclass in the dangers of underestimated silent strength. Grant lived his life believing that whoever speaks the loudest owns the room, never realizing that the person holding the deed doesn't need to raise their voice. He stripped Audrey of everything he thought she had, only to find out that the only thing of value in his life was the very woman he discarded. It's a powerful reminder that karma doesn't always come as a lightning bolt. Sometimes it's just the quiet withdrawal of the hands that were holding you up. If this story of ultimate karma and hidden power gave you chills, make sure to hit that like button and let us know your favorite twist moment in the comments. Did Grant get exactly what he deserved, or do you think Audrey's 5-year plan was a bit too cold-blooded? We love hearing your theories. To make sure you never miss another deep dive into real-life drama and the secrets of the ultra-wealthy, click subscribe and turn on all notifications. Your support keeps this channel running and allows us to bring you more epic stories like this one. Thanks for watching, and stay sharp. You never know who's really funding the life you're living.